let's look at cleaning up the scene. So right now I can see that if I select everything, it's kind of a mess. I mean, it looks good, but I feel like if we look at all this stuff and over here, kind of messy. So this is considered all the input, okay, the history of what we're doing. So you can see that for the keyboard, for example, we started off with a cube and then we extruded some faces and then we did some wedging of the faces. Same with this, we did all of that. So that's kind of the history of what we've done. Okay, you can see some of these get pretty extensive. Now, if you have a lot of history on a lot of things, it can start to slow down your computer. So what you can do is I could select everything in the scene and go edit, delete all by type history. And maybe I want to add that to the shelf. Control Shift, click, and then I delete the history. And now I can see that there's no more history on any of these objects. And I feel like that's a good thing, right? It's going to make it simpler for our shapes in our computer. But one thing, like for this, since I deleted the history, the curve in this, remember we created it with a curve, and there's the curve. And now if I adjust this curve, I can see that the shape no longer follows that curve because we deleted the history. There's no history associated between it. So you have to kind of make sure that you're done finalizing everything before you delete the history. So, but I'm happy with everything. So I deleted the history. So I guess I could even delete these curves. Those are no longer needed. And the other thing I want to do is I want to name everything. So if I click on this, I'm going to call this monitor. Then I can click on this, call this keyboard. If I click on this, I could either name it here or I could name it in the channel box right here. You can see that it doesn't matter. Either way is fine. Or sometimes I like to select this and see what it highlights. Okay, I'll call this computer. Mouse. I'll call this chord 1 and then chord 2. Okay, great. And if I have a group, I can see that this chair is actually grouped. So I'm going to name the group, I'm going to call this chair, and then I'm going to name the individual parts of the chair. So I can see that, okay, I'll call this seat. And let's say if you had a lot of things to name. Now this wouldn't be a very big deal naming all 5 of these, but if I wanted to name more than one thing at a time, I could highlight and select like this, and then up here I can change this to rename, and now I could call this like chair leg, enter, and now I can see that it names all of those the same thing, and then it just takes it with a number at the end. Okay, great. So now I've got all of that. And maybe what I want to do is set up, I could make some display layers as well. So for example, I could maybe grab this maybe with the chords, and this, and maybe I call that computer. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to double click on layer 1 and call this computer underscore visibility. And now I can toggle and hide that visibility. One thing I should mention is that you can still see the grid. If I want to hide that grid, I can turn that off right here. Okay. And maybe on this, I could grab the entire chair. Maybe I grab the group. And I call this chair underscore visibility. And table, even though it's its own thing, I could still put it on layer. Okay, great. And the last thing that I want to do to clean this up is I can see that when I click on these things, there's all this weird kind of numbers, right? Basically, that is how far it's been moved from the center of the grid. So that's kind of weird. So if I go like this, and if I go to modify, freeze transformations, I'm going to hold down Control Shift to add that to the shelf. Now, if I click on that, it zeroed everything out except for the scale. Put that at 1, so that's good. So if I select everything and go to freeze transformation, you can see that now everything is much cleaner here. So there's no history. The transformations are frozen, and we have everything named over here and also here. One last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to go Control G to group it. And I'm going to call this workstation. And then if I open that up, I can see it like this. And I could even maybe grab this further. Let's say if I wanted to group all the computer stuff in here, and I know that I have it selected here, I could right click and go to select objects, and now it'll select everything that's on this group. And if I wanted to group it here as well, I could hit Control G. I'm going to call this computer. Maybe computer station, okay? So now I've got the table, I've got my chair, and my computer station. And then I've got the workstation as a whole. And then I have it here as well. Okay? So that is a much, much cleaner scene file.